Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So we are talking about now the next issue now. So remember last time we discussed the masala with regards to having animals, but the baby version of the animal. What is the ruling of having baby animals? Are they considered to be zakatable or not? And what I would say is when you're looking at these masalas, what you have to remember is these masail, they give you an insight into how the fuqaha used to think. And that's what we want. When we're reading these books, we want to develop inside ourselves the ability to be able to think. That's the most important thing that you should take away from fiqh. Obviously, understanding what the masala is, the translation of it, and understanding what they're saying, that's fine. But that is obviously the gateway towards the thinking. The thinking is the higher objective, you want to say. So when you study fiqh, if you just study fiqh and you just learn the translation of the meaning, you're not creating inside yourself tafaqquh. Tafaqquh has to be created if you leave the lesson and you're in your house or you're on the street or at work or whatever, and you're thinking about masail, how would we look at this, and that means you're benefiting from the tafaqquh or the lesson itself, because your mind is working. So that's what we need to develop here as well. Try and understand. And I would definitely say, look, we only have one lesson in the week at the moment. We, might increase it to more if in the future is possible. But what you need to do is in the week, read as many books as you can on the discussion that we're going to have. So I assume you guys prepare and read Hidayah. But with Hidayah, also read Binaya, read Inaya, read Fadl Qadi. At least 2 books you should read on the side. I would definitely say 2 books at least you should read on the side, so that you're looking at what other scholars are saying as well. Okay, anyway. So, next masala. وَمَنْ وَجَبَ عَلَيْهِ سِنٌّ فَلَمْ تُوجَدْ أَخَذَ الْمُصَدِّقْ أَعْلَى مِنْهَا وَرَدَّ الْفَضْلَ أو أَخَذَ دُونَهَا وَأَخَذَ الْفَضْلَ. So, let's say for example, like I am the zakat collector, right? So I work on behalf of the government. We don't have a government in this country. I mean, obviously, if you're in the UK, that is. If you're not in the UK, then it's different. But in the UK, we don't have a government which governs the Islamic laws. And this is where people, when they're studying fiqh, they don't see the existence of an Islamic government. So when a lot of these books were written, they were written within the concept, within the framework of the existence of an Islamic authority. And this makes a big difference in zakat, in buyu, in nikah and talaq, in hajj. Right, it makes a massive difference, because the government themselves can put in place certain laws and rules which become binding, and certain fatwa are in accordance with the government, basically. Right. So if you look at fatwa from the days of Imam Abu Hanifa and in the days of Sahib al-Hidayah, or even later on in the time of Imam Ibn Abidin rahimahullah, things change because, especially in Ibn Abidin's days, which was the era of postmodernism. So postmodernism came, new things were coming into the Muslim society, and they were having an impact. So I'm the zakat collector. I am collecting zakat, and remember, zakat collector only collects al-amwal al-zahira. So remember, we said zakat is of 2 types: amwal al-zahira, amwal al-batina. Zahira is basically out of the 8 categories. It's livestock, so camels, cows, goats, and if there's horses, then horses, and crops. Yeah, that's all the zakat collector really collects. As for everything else, like gold and silver and business stock, inventory, that is something which the government will leave to you. They can collect it, but they generally leave it to the person's own discretion. They decide how they want to give it, where they give it. So I'm a zakat collector. I come to you, and let's say, for example, you've got 20 camels, right? If you've got 20 camels, how much zakat do I have to collect from you? And remember, if you've got 20 camels, how much zakat do I collect from you? And remember, 20 is 4, yeah? 4, yeah? 4 goats. Okay? Yeah, everyone got that? So remember, 5, and then 10, and then 15, and then 20 goats. Okay, what if you got 30 camels? How much zakat do you give if you got 30 camels?
Bint al-Labun.
Yeah. So you're going to have to give a binti makhaz. Yeah. Binti makhaz, then binti labun, and then jid'a, and then hiqqa. Okay. So let's say, for example, like I've come to you to collect a binti makhaz, but you don't have binti makhaz. You got something which is higher than a binti makhaz. You got a binti labun, or you got a jid'a, or you got hiqqa. Or let's say, for example, you're supposed to give a jid'a, but you don't have a jid'a. The only thing that you have is a binti labun or binti makhaz. Meaning, the zakat collector is not going to always find the thing that he is looking for. Yeah, so zakat collector is not going to always find the thing that he's looking for. He might find the exact camel or the exact zakat that he's going to collect, he gets it. And he might not find it, he might find a higher or lower. So he says, Man wajaba alayhi sinnun, whoever has to give a specific age, like I have to collect a specific age camel or a cow. Like I was supposed to get a tabi, but you don't have a tabi, you only got a musin. Yeah, you don't have a 1-year-old, you only got a 2-year-old. Then what's going to happen? فَلَمْ تُوجَد, and that specific age is not found. أَخَذَ الْمُصَدِّق, the musaddiq, okay, look at this. Musaddiq actually refers to zakat collector, okay. Yeah, so the musaddiq, صدق يصدق مصدق. Now, musaddiq, yeah, when the sad has a shadda as well. إِصَّدَّقَ يَصَّدَّقُ. That generally refers to the zakat giver, okay. So those are the difference usually between the two. So musaddiq is the zakat collector, and musaddiq, 2 shaddas, one on the sad, one on the dal, is for the zakat giver. So the zakat collector, he can take the a'la minha, the higher grade animal than the one he's supposed to take. So let's say, for example, that there's 4 grades of animals, yeah, binti makhad, binti labun, jid'a, hiqqa. He can't find the binti labun, so he can take the binti makhad or he can take the hiqqa. So a'la minha wa radd al-fadl. If he takes the higher, so let's say, for example, he's supposed to take binti labun, but he took jid'a. If he takes the jid'a, what does he do? So he takes the jid'a, he evaluates the jid'a compared to the binti labun. So let's say the binti labun costs £200 in the market, and the jid'a costs £300. So what he's going to do is going to take the jid'a, and then he's going to return the fadl, meaning the extra £100 difference. He's going to give that back. Yeah, that's one possibility. Second possibility, what does he do? أخذ دونها وأخذ الفضل. So أخذ دونها means that he's going to take the lesser. So he's not going to take the a'la, he's going to take the lesser. So what did the lesser mean? Meaning that if, for example, he was supposed to take binti labun, he takes binti makhad. Yeah, so he takes the binti makhad. And now let's say the binti makhad is worth £100. So he's going to take the binti makhad, and he's also going to take £100 extra from him on top. Yeah, to make up for the value of the binti labun. Does anyone understand that? Or should I say again? Understand what that means? Yeah. Okay. So he says, وَمَنْ وَجَبَ. So he says, وَهَذَا يُبْتَنَى على أن أخذ القيمة. Here is where there's a very well-known ikhtilaf between the madhabs, the early imams, even the Sahaba and Tabi'in. What does zakat come under? Does collecting zakat of animals come under Amr Ta'abudi? Right? Is it Amr Ta'abudi where we can only give that thing? Like, for instance, like, when it comes to Qurbani, Udhiyah, sacrificing animals in Dhul Hijjah. And you have to give, for example, like, a particular type of animal. So is it like that Amr Ta'abudi where you can only give that animal? You can't say, oh, you know what, instead of this year me giving a goat, I'm going to give a chicken, or I'm going to give 5 chickens instead of a goat. Right? You can't do that over there. That's Amr Ta'abudi. That's something which is from the Muqaddarat al-Shar'. That's the Sharia has specified that specific category, and therefore you can't use like qiyas in there, rational in there, to try and figure out another substitute. So does zakat fall under that category, or is zakat something, meaning the thing that you give in zakat, is it something that you can even give the value of? Hanafis, they said you can give the value of it. Right? They were well known for this argument. They even said it in Sadaqatul Fitr. So all the madhabs were almost, you can say, unanimous that in Sadaqatul Fitr, you have to give one of four things: half a sa, which is about 1.5 liters of wheat, or one sa of barley, one sa of dates, or one sa of raisins. Right? They said to the poor in the Eid al-Fitr, you have to give one of these. You can't give its monetary equivalent. You can't, because this is the Sharia has told us this. The Prophet ﷺ told us this. He didn't tell us a value, and therefore they say the value is something which is non-applicable. Hanafi said, no, you can give a value. Right, now we're going to discuss that in the next masala that's going to come. We're going to talk about why do the Hanafis allow taking qima? Yeah, because this is also another fiqhi concept as well, of how the Hanafis differentiate zakat from udhiyah. هذا يبتنى على أن أخذ القيمة. This masala is based upon the idea, meaning the musaddiq being allowed to take a higher tier animal or a lower tier animal. This is based upon the idea that أخذ القيمة في باب الزكاة جائز. So taking the qima is jaiz عندنا, according to us. على ما نذكره, which we're going to mention inshallah ta'ala. إلا أن في الوجه الأول, there's two scenarios in there. So scenario number one, I'm supposed to take a bint labun, but instead he doesn't have a bint labun, so I take the higher one. Right? I take the jid'a, hiqqa, jid'a, yeah. And then what I do is I give back the difference. So bint labuns cost £200, jid'a costs £300, so I take the jid'a and I give back to him £100. Okay, this is called fasl al-awwal, first scenario. He says إلا أن في الوجه الأول له, meaning له, the zakat collector, he has the right أن لا يأخذ, that he doesn't even have to take the animal. Yeah, he can even say to the person that, look, I'm not going to take a jid'a. You have to either give me the exact animal that's necessary, i.e. bint labun, or you got to give me the qima. So in other words, it's as though the zakat collector has three possibilities of what he can do. So if he has a bint labun, and the guy can't find a bint labun, he has none in his flock or his herd, what does he do? He takes the higher and he returns the difference. That's one possibility. And the other possibility is he can just say to him, well, tough, you have to give me the exact animal, or you have to give me its value. Yeah, so he says, له أن لا يأخذ ويطالب بعين الواجب أو بقيمته. So the عين الواجب means the specific obligation or the value, market value of that specific obligation. Yeah, so i.e. £200. Now, why is this for? So when we look at this, what's really happening over here? Right. So when we study buyu, I mean, I haven't done buyu with you guys, but normally when I teach buyu, buyu is very important because buyu actually gives you, like, it's a fast tracks you in tafaqquh than ibadat. This is what one of the scholars, Shaykh Yusuf bin Rahimahullah, used to say, that if you want to develop your tafaqquh fiqh, you have to study buyu, mu'amalat. First of all, study mu'amalat, then study ibadat. Because ibadat doesn't have that much tafaqquh in there. It has tafaqquh, but it basically is based upon a lot of things which are like nas, mansus. So it's just basically text that you take. Whereas mu'amalat is filled with tafaqquh. You've got to think of scenarios. You have to think outside the box a lot. So if two people, I'll give you an example of what I want to say here. When you see an exchange taking place, for example, like let's say, in this case, Dina, for example. If I, for example, say to Dina, okay, Dina, I'm going to give you this pen and you give me a book. So what's happening over here? There is an exchange taking place. There's an exchange, right? As a third person, if someone was watching that take place, how would they classify it in fiqh? Like, under what chapter would they classify this? Would they classify it as a gift? Would they classify it as a trade? Would they classify it, I don't know, as something else? So whenever we see like something being exchanged from two sides, when it's a bilateral exchange of mal, usually it comes under bay'. So for example, like iqala is where there's mutual nullification of a contract. So if I, for example, give the pen to Dina, she gives me a book, and then I say, okay, you know what, can I actually have that pen back? She goes, yes, fine. She takes the book back, I take the pen back, mutual nullification of the contract, that's fine. Between me and her, this is now created what we call a nullification, fasq al-aqd. Okay? But for a spectator, a third person, for them, what's happened is this is a second transaction that's taken place. The first one was where I gave her the pen, she gave me the book. The second one was she gave me I gave the book back and I took the pen back. So why is this important? Because in fiqh there is a concept which is al-ibratu lil-ma'ani la lil-alfaz. Al-ibra lil-ma'ani, that what is considered in a deal, in a contract, in fiqh, is the substance, the essence of what's happening, rather than the names of what's happening. So I'm a zakat collector, okay? Let's go back to this masala. So if I'm supposed to get a bint labun, and I don't get a bint labun, and I've said I'll take your jid'a. So what's happened here is I've taken something, that's not a bait obviously, that's just pure zakat collection. But if I take a jid'a and then I give you back £100, do you understand? So what's happening over here, he says, this resembles a shira. It's like the donor, the zakat giver, is doing a trade with me. Initially, it was not a trade. I was simply taking. But when I give back, when the zakat collector gives back £100, there seems to be a mutual exchange now. So he says, you don't understand how is a mutual exchange? Yeah, or shall I repeat it? Okay. So he says, if you go back to here, it says, look, it says, he says, أنه لا يأخذ ويطالب أو بقيمته لأنه الشراء. Right? So he says, why can you take the qima? It's because there's a shira taking place. There's like a trade taking place. Okay, in that. And because it's a shira, the rules of buying and selling is this mubadalatul mali bil mali bit taradi, right? Which is an exchange of goods for goods with consent. So the reason why I can't force him, like I can't say to the zakat giver, right, you must give me a jid'a. I don't care. Because there's no obligation in trade. In trade is all about consent. So therefore, that he wants to show through it being resembling trade, he wants to show that this is considered to be optional. Like it can't be considered to be something that's coercive, like forcing them to do this. Okay, so he says, lahu an la ya'khudh. So lahu meaning the zakat collector has the option an la ya'khudh. He can, if he wants, he doesn't have to take the higher tier. He can even ask for the exact thing that he's supposed to collect, or its value. So that's a choice, that is. He goes لأنه شراء, and the reason for this choice is because this falls under trade. It's like buying. Now, just remember that, okay, this point of buying, okay, because later on we're going to raise a few objections of later Hanafis on this. But does everyone understand what I just said here? Shall I repeat it? Do you understand? If you haven't understood, I'll repeat it again. I don't mind. I want you guys to be able to understand this. Yeah, understood? Okay. وفي الوجه الثاني, and the second scenario is that I'm supposed to collect from you a bint labun, but you don't have a bint labun. So I take the lesser. I take the bint makhad from you. Okay, so I've taken bint makhad. Now what happens with bint makhad? Okay, so the bint makhad now is obviously of a lesser value. Yeah, and so you have to give me on top of that, you have to give me something extra. So he says, وَجْهَ ثَانِي يُجْبَرُ, meaning I have to take the binti. In the second scenario, I have to take the binti makhad. It's like there's no option here because it doesn't resemble a trade. Yeah, it doesn't resemble a trade here. As in, I'm taking two things from you. I'm taking a binti makhad from you, and I'm taking £100 on top from you. So therefore, there's no mutual exchange. There's only a unilateral exchange, one-sided exchange. لأنه لا بيع فيه, because there's no bait in there. There's just a one way. So if you say to me, right, you have to take this binti makhad, and you have to take £100 on top, you'll have to take it. Yeah, يجبر. بل هو إعطاء بالقيمة. Rather, what this is you're giving the value. In other words, what is the value of a binti labun? The value of a binti labun is a binti makhad with £100 on top. Okay? So, in other words, you have no choice. This is what you have to take. And in the other scenario, if I was to take the higher, right? The higher, I actually have a choice. I can take the higher, or I can take the value of the animal. Yeah. Yeah, and that's what he wants to explain. Yeah, why that the Hanafis allow this to happen. Okay. So وَيَجُوزُ next masla. Now, if you go back here, this hashia, I just want to read this hashia to you, this inaya hashia. It's a good hashia. So he said, look, وَمَنْ وَجَعَ عَلَيْهِ سُورَةُ الْمَسْأَلَةِ. So I'm going to read this whole thing here. It's really important. رَجُلٌ وَجَبَ عَلَيْهِ بِنْتُ لَبُونَ. Yeah, وَلَمْ توجد عنده. So there's a guy who's supposed to give bint labun, and he doesn't have it. يأخذ المصدق, the zakat collector will take a hiqqa, which is obviously higher. ويرد الفضل, and then he returns the excess. أو وجب عليه الحقة, or he has to give a hiqqa, he doesn't have it. يأخذ بنت لبون, right? So the zakat collector will take the lesser tier. ويأخذ الفضل, and he also will take on top of that the extra. قال في النهاية ظاهر ما ذكر في الكتاب. So he said the apparent text seems to indicate أن الخيار للمصدق. Yeah. وهو الذي يأخذ الصدقات, meaning the zakat collector has the choice. Yeah. He goes, this is what the Hidayah text seems to indicate, that the musaddiq has the choice of taking the higher tier or the lower tier. He says, but this is not correct. لكن الصواب, this isn't the correct meaning. If Imam Hidayah intended this, well, this is not right then. أن الخيار, that the khiyar really إلى من عليه الواجب. The choice must always be the choice of the giver. Meaning the giver has the choice that he can, if he wants, give the higher tier, or he can give the lower tier. And if he gives the higher tier, he deserves, the difference back. And if he gives the lower tier, then he must give on top something else as well. لأن الخيار شرع رفقا. He goes, the reason why I don't have a choice. Like when I come to collect zakat, I don't have a choice. Whatever you want to give me, you give me that, as long as you give me the right thing. Because khiyar in Sharia, in according to the law, rifqan has been legislated to ease, to facilitate biman alayhi al-wajib, for the person who the obligation is upon, i.e. the giver. والرفق, and ease, so facilitation, إنما يتحقق بتخييره, can only be conceived when there is a choice he has, right? So if I have a choice, it doesn't make sense. It's like لا يكلف الله نفسا إلا وسعها. So there always has to be some sort of a ease on the person who the obligation is on. كأنه أراد به إذا سمحت نفس من عليه. So it may be Sahib al-Hidayah intended this, that if you, the giver, wants, then the zakat collector can take off him. So if I, the zakat collector, come to you and I say, right, you know what, I'm going to take the lower, okay, you go, it's fine, take the lower, I don't mind. Or I might say, I'm going to take the higher, okay. So it's like, the assumption is that the giver has already given consent. It is ظاهر من حال المسلم, because the apparent state of a Muslim seems to be أنه يختار ما هو الأرفق بالفقراء. He's always going to try to give whatever's easier for the fuqara. Yeah, whatever's easy. وأقول ظاهر ما ذكر في الكتاب لا يدل على ذلك. And I say, Ibn Sa'ib al-Inaya says, what the kitab is indicated towards doesn't seem to say that. إنما يدل على. So, however, here, this is the objection I was telling you about. There's an objection against Sahib al-Hidayah, which is, Sahib al-Hidayah seems to be saying, in the case of taking the higher tier, he has a choice. He can either take the higher tier, compel him to give the exact thing, or take the value. Yeah, three things for the first one. أن الخيار في الوجه الأول المصدق, the zakat giver, the zakat collector. حيث قال أن له أن لا يأخذ. That wording seems to indicate that Sahib al-Hidayah believes that the zakat collector is the one. ويطالب بعين الواجب أو بقيمته لأنه شراء. وفي الوجه الثاني لمن عليه قال يجبر لأنه لا بيع فيه بل هو إعطاء بالقيمة ولا بعد في أن يكون مختار المصنف التفضيل. Yeah, he says maybe Sahib al-Hidayah has given his own preference on this. Yeah, now remember, Sahib al-Hidayah sometimes has his own ikhtiyarat, okay? Yeah, so what we call tafarrudat. So we call tafarrudat, ikhtiyarat. So Sahib al-Hidayah has ikhtiyarat in many masail. And if you have time, it's good to go through Hidayah and collect the ikhtiyarat of Sahib al-Hidayah, where he differs with other Hanafis. And this seems to be one of them. A lot of Bahar has mentioned this, Raddul Muhtar has mentioned this as well. There seems to be, Sahib al-Hidayah seems to be alone in how he's presented this masala. So what's the khulasa of this then? Khulasa of this is this. Sahib Hidayah believes that when a zakat collector comes to you and you don't have the exact animal you're supposed to give, if you give him the higher one, he has a choice. He can either take the higher or demand the exact animal or take the qima, right? Because it's like a mutual transaction exchange. And otherwise, if you don't have the higher one, you have the lower one, he must take the lower one with money on top. Do you understand that? Okay, that's the whole last of it. All right, next. So then he says, وَيَجُوزُ دَفْءُ الْقِيَمِ فِي الزَّكَاةِ عِنْدَنَا. So it's permissible to give the value. So it's giants to give the qima instead of giving the exact thing itself. Remember we said this is obviously not the position of the other madhabs. And some like if you classically read about this in the other madhabs, you'll see them attacking the Hanafis a lot in this. And they say, look, the Hanafis are using a rationale to try and understand the ilal of those umur al-muta'abbada. Yeah, those matters in Islam which are ibadat. The Hanafis are trying to use their rationale to get into it, which is not right. Okay, so what's our response? So we say, يَجُوزُ دَفْءُ الْقِيَمِ, you're permitted to give value when it comes to zakat, according to us. كَذَا فِي الْكَفَّارَات. Number two, in kafarat, you can even give. So for example, if you break an oath, right, and you have to feed poor people, or if you break a fast and all that. So all the kafarat that we have, you're allowed to give money instead of feeding, right? The value of the food, you give it to them. Likewise, number three, sadaqat al-fitr. So in sadaqat al-fitr, instead of giving those measurements that I told you, the 4 measurements, you can actually give. So this is what we do. It's very practical. When zakat, when the Ramadan comes, a lot of charities, they're asking for the fitr, Eid al-Fitr. So we give cash. Yeah, in the UK, sometimes £3, £4, £5, whatever it is. And ushur. So ushur is basically when it comes to crops that you're growing in your garden or you're growing, you give zakat on that. So instead of giving the stuff, you can actually give the value. One another and a vow. So if you vowed to, feed so many people, instead of actually feeding them, you can actually give the value as well. See, the point is, the Hanafis looked at these things and they allowed the concept of value to be given in exchange for, instead of that thing itself. So, in fact, in today's times, a lot of the madhabs have actually shifted towards the Hanafi position on this masala because it's more practical. They've seen that instead of giving a poor person, these things, for them, the value is actually the more practical thing. قال الشافعي رحمه الله, Imam Shafi, what's his argument? لا يجوز, he says, not allowed. You cannot give the value, you must give the item itself in all of these things. اتباعا للمنصوص, because his argument is you have to follow what the text says. The divine text, the Quran, and then Sunnah is telling you have to give in Sadaqat al-Fitr the 4 things. In the camels you have to give 5 a goat, 10 2 goats, 15, etc. and cows, etc. So he's saying this is an amr ta'abbudi, and it's like zakat that it's mansus alayhi. Kama fil hadaya wal dhahaya. So he gives a kind of comparison, and he says just like in hadi, hadaya is a jama of hadi. Hadi is the sacrificial animals in Hajj. So there's 3 types of Hajj: tatawwu', optional; qiran, where you have one ihram and umrah and Hajj mixed together; and tamattu', which is 2 ihrams and umrah and Hajj separately. Yeah. So in all of these, he says you're not allowed to give the value, right? If you have to give an animal, you have to give the animal. You can't give its monetary value, right? It won't be accepted. And duhaya is like qurbani, right? So Eid al-Adha, sacrificing an animal. You probably heard people say this like recently in modern times, where they say, instead of me doing qurbani this year, what I'm going to do is I'm going to send that money to Syria for the orphans, or I'm going to send it to the floods in Pakistan or in Bangladesh, or I'm going to send it to a village in Yemen. Yeah, you probably heard people say that. So obviously their sincerity seems to be there. They seems to be very sincere what they're saying, but this is where you're not allowed to. It's like saying, for example, instead of me praying salat 5 times a day, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and 5 times a day I'm going to help all the elderly in my area. I'm going to help them. I'm going to buy groceries for them. I'm going to clean their garden and stuff like that. So when can we leave a hukum shar'i that has been explicitly given to us, a mansus alayhi, and do something as a substitute of that? When can we do that? That's what we want to know. So he says you can't do in any of these. If the Sharia tells you something where there's la majala lil aqli fihi, in which they, people can't use their aql in there, then you have to stick to it. Okay, lana anna al-amra bil ada ila al-faqir, that the instruction, meaning the divine instruction, the legal instruction, that you have to pay to the faqir. What is this all about? Like, why does the Sharia say to us we have to give a camel, 5 camels, you've got to give a goat to the poor people, 10 camels, you've got to give 2 goats to the poor people. If you've got 30 cows, you've got to give a tabit to the poor people. What's the point? Like, is the Sharia saying that particular animal that has blood flowing through its veins and a heart pumping, is that what the Sharia wants poor people to get? Like, is there some special thing inside of that? Hanafi said, no, that doesn't seem to be the case. What seems to be the case is Isal rizq, is to reach the rizq that Allah has promised all of creation. You're meant to be like in the chain of events. You're meant to be like an intermediary, or a means of reaching the rizq to the poor people. That's the idea of zakat. Yeah, you're just a chain in events, and you're getting the zakat to them. Yeah, so in the Quran, just like in the Quran, Allah says, وَمَا مِن دَابَّةٍ فِي الْأَرْضِ إِلَّا عَلَى اللَّهِ رِزْقُهَا. There is no creation that moves on earth except that Allah has promised its rizq. And how does Allah give the rizq? Obviously, He gives it through means, isn't it? The means asbab that we see. So the Hanafis are saying that the asal reason for us giving zakat is we need to get rizq to those people. That's what it's saying. You see, that's amazing. It's an amazing way of looking at it. As in, if you think about it, the Hanafis are actually not going against the text. They are actually understanding the higher objectives of the text. Like, what is the higher objective of giving these animals? Is it the animal, the flesh and blood itself? No, it's not. What is it? It's the making the poor people rich. That's why you give it to the poor. You're making the poor rich. And how do you make the poor rich? It's obviously, an animal is governed by, obviously, value, isn't it? And that value, the rizq, that's getting to them. So the Hanafi said the asl thing that we look at is Isal rizq al-maw'ud, that Allah has promised to the poor people. فَيَكُونُ إِبْطَالًا لِقَيْدِ الشَّاةِ. Yeah, so therefore, this would now nullify, this would do ibtal of the specific term shat. Like, if you have 5 camels, you got to give 1 goat. But so, is the goat that Allah wants people to get? Or is it the greater concept of what that goat actually means in the whole universe of rizq, of how rizq works? Yeah, it's just one of those pieces of rizq out of all the pieces of rizq in the universe. Yeah, that's what it is. Yakunu ibtalan. So he goes, therefore this isal is actually nullifying the qaid shat. Now, the qaid shat is not that important. What's important is rizq getting to them. And it's done in the form of a shat, or the value of a shat. Does everyone understand that concept? Or shall I say it again? Yeah. Okay, right. So he says, فَصَارَ كَالْجِزْيَةِ. Yeah, so therefore this masla now, it's like jizya. Jizya is basically where non-Muslims who are living in a Muslim country, namely the Jews and Christians, yeah, and then as an extension, the fire worshippers, and as another extension, the non-Muslims outside of the Arabian Peninsula. So let me just give you like a little synopsis of this. In the time of the Prophet ﷺ, the mushrikeen of the Arabs had only 2 options. They either accept Islam or they fight. There's no jizya, right? But the Jews and Christians, they had an option of, accept Islam, give jizya, or fight. Yeah, that's what the options were. And the rule for non-Arab mushriks, and any other faith for that matter, is that they give jizya. Right? They have 3 options. So, like mushriks of India were given an option of jizya, etc. So, he says over here, he says, فَصَارَ كَالْجِزْيَةِ. So, this masala now is like the masala of the jizya. In other words, in jizya, there's a specific amount that you have to give in jizya. That there's three tiers of jizya, and basically jizya is only given by men who are healthy enough to fight in war. So men who are healthy enough to fight in war, they only give jizya. Women don't give jizya, children don't give jizya, and disabled don't give jizya. Okay, so it's only those. And there's 3 tiers of jizya. Yeah, so it's like 12 silver coins, 12 gold coins, silver coins, I can't remember. I think it's silver coins. 24 silver coins and 48 silver coins, right? So depending on how rich you are. Yeah, so poor people will give 12, average people give 24, and then rich people will give 40 a year per year. Once a year you give that. That's your jizya days, and you get all the rights of living in a Muslim state. So he says, فَصَارَ كَالْجِزْيَةِ. So he says, this is like jizya then. So in other words, in jizya, even though jizya is mentioned in a specific like monetary type, but you're allowed to give it, it can actually be discharged in any form. All the scholars agree, there's no specific type of currency you have to give it in. So he says, if it's allowed over there, right, if it's allowed over there, then it should be plausible over here. Yeah. So he says, فَصَارَ كَالْجِزْيَةِ. Therefore, this concept is like the jizya. بِخِلَافِ الْحَدَايَا. As opposed to hadaya. What does hadaya mean? Hadaya means hadi, like, sacrificial animals in Hajj. So he goes, the sacrificial animals in Hajj that you sacrifice, over there you can't give the value. Why? Because لِأَنَّ الْقُرْبَةَ فِيهَا إِرَاقَةُ الدَّمِ. Because the getting close to Allah, the close proximity to Allah, can only be achieved through allowing the blood to flow. That's like mansus alayhi. This is something which is categorical. The Quran mentions it, لَيْ يَنَالَ اللَّهَ لُهُومُهَا وَلَا دِمَاؤُهَا وَلَكِنْ يَنَالُهُ التَّقْوَى مِنْكُمْ. So it's as though it's over there. It doesn't make sense. Allah, the creator of the universe, who is independent of everything, why does he need blood? Doesn't make sense. Why does he need to see the blood of an animal shed? Doesn't make sense. It's something which is, wara al-aql. Yeah, it's supra rational. So you have rational, you have super rational. This comes under super rational. Like 5 times salat. Why do you pray 5 for? Why not 4? Why not 6? Why do we go 7 times around the Kaaba? This is why we stick to whatever the Nas says here. Right? We don't use like a monetary equivalent. وَهُوَ لَا يُؤْقَلْ. And this is something which cannot be rationalized. Like why? We understand zakat can be rationalized to an extent that we know that the zakat is meant to sustain the poor. But shedding of the blood of the animal doesn't seem to make sense. Why is that? Okay. وَوَجْهُ الْقُرْبَ فِي الْمُتَنَازَعْ فِيهِ سَدُّ خَلَّةِ الْمُحْتَاجِ. Yeah, so وَجْهُ الْقُرْبَ. So obviously zakat is a qurba as well, without a doubt. Meaning, when you're going to give your zakat, you're obviously making yourself get closer to Allah. Just like when you pray salat, you get closer to Allah. And just like when you go hajj, you get closer to Allah. But the reason for why you're getting closer to Allah, fil mutanaza' fihi, means in the masala that's disputed, i.e., if you have 5 camels and you give 1 goat, that's a mutanaza' fihi masala. Can you give the goat value, or do you have to give the goat itself? So he says, wajhul qurba fil mutanaza' fihi. The reason of the qurba in the mutanaza' fihi is saddu khallat al-muhtaj, is filling. Sad means to fill the khalla, yeah, the need, or the thing that is missing in the muhtaj, the needy, the faqir, which makes sense, ma'qul. Like it's rational. It makes sense that there's a poor person, he needs financial support, you give him financial support, khalas, makes sense, ma'qul. But why do you need to slaughter an animal on the 10th of Dhul Hijjah? Doesn't make sense. Why? Now I just want to point out a little thing over here. So look, when we say qurba, so you have 2 things. Okay, you have ibadat, and I mentioned this before. You have ibadat, you have qurb. Okay, ibadat, according to Hanafis, ibadat are only those things. Ibadat are only those things which are considered to be given to us by the lawgiver, and there's no way at all that we could have figured out how to do this ourselves. Yeah, so they're given to us by the lawgiver. We could not have rationalized how we do this ourselves, and they require intention for their validity. Do you understand that? So, for example, salat. Salat is an ibadah. Why? Because we were given this by Allah. we couldn't have rationalized it. Like if we didn't know Islam, we could never have rationalized that Allah wants us to stand and then bow down and then put our heads on the ground a certain number of times. We couldn't have figured this out. Yeah. So it's غير معقول. And number three is it requires intention for its validity. Anything that does not require intention for its validity cannot be an ibadah. So for example, entering into a masjid cannot be an ibadah. Yeah. Or for example, touching a Quran is not an ibadah. Or even, for example, like going on a journey to study knowledge is not an ibadah. Studying knowledge itself is not an ibadah as well. Yeah. I don't know what else is out there which generally is misunderstood as ibadah. Sleeping is not an ibadah. Eating is not an ibadah. It can never ever be an ibadah. Sleeping can never be an ibadah. Yeah. But these can be qurab. A qurba is something which brings you closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So if you sleep with the intention of waking up for Fajr in the morning, then now that becomes rewarding now. So everything in the world potentially can become rewarding, but not everything in the world is an ibadah. The ibadat are limited and they've only been given to us by the lawgiver. That's why the Hanafis are very strict on bid'ah. Yeah, so we've seen this before, if you remember the chapter of Eid and other places where the Hanafis are quite strict on bid'ah, because the innovation bid'ah is where you're trying to invent an ibadah claiming that Allah wants us to do this, right? And that is a big accusation against Allah. That's a big accusation against Allah. So this is why ibadat are specific, they're limited. So zakat comes under ibadah without a doubt. But certain elements in zakat are rational. Remember that. So zakat itself, like we could never have figured out 2.5% would have been the amount that we're going to give. And we could never have figured out that if you have 5 camels, you've got to give a goat. But within salat, within zakat, within hajj, there are certain things that can be to an extent rationalized. Like this, for example. Does everyone understand that? Yeah. So I think this is a very important thing for people to understand. Otherwise, generally, you have this misconception that everything in life is an ibadah. Sleep becomes an ibadah. That's not really kind of the haqiqi meaning of ibadah. That's a majaz meaning. That's just a figurative way of saying. Because in that case, what they're comparing ibadah to is they're comparing ibadah to something you do for the sake of Allah. Basically, anything you do for the sake of Allah, it just becomes an ibadah, which is not the case. Okay, now you've understood that. I just wanted to mention the point here, which is, look, saddu khallatil muhtaj. What is that? That is basically you are filling the need of a poor person, right? So the khalla, like the khalal that the muhtaj has inside of him, yeah, the kind of missing things he has, you're filling those missing gaps in his life, financial. This is qurbah. I mean, you don't even have to think you're doing it for Allah's sake and you get reward for it. So you see a poor person and you just give them some money and you never even think to yourself that I'm doing it for Allah's sake. It automatically is counted as Allah's sake. So in other words, when we talk about the things that bring you closer to Allah, those are like general close things. Yeah. In other words, the closeness to Allah is achieved simply by doing a good thing. That's it. So when people say, I didn't do this for the sake of Allah. No, doing it for the sake of Allah does not mean you have to sit there and contemplate and focus your intention. No, it doesn't mean that. It simply means as long as you've done something which falls under the greater meaning of for the pleasure of Allah, then it's fine. Like helping the poor, does it please Allah? Of course it does. Listening to your parents, please Allah? Of course it does. Sleeping with the intention you want to get up for Fajr, does it please Allah? Of course it does. Yeah. So all of these things can become qurab. Okay, وَهُوَ مَعْقُولٌ. And this is the thing that is considered to be ma'qul. Does everyone understand that? Yeah. Okay. Now I just wanna read for you guys because I think the next topic. I think we'll read the next topic, and then we'll. وَلَيْسَ فِي الْعَوَامِلِ وَالْحَوَامِلِ وَالْعَلُوفَةِ صَدَقَةٌ. Okay, so لَيْسَ فِي الْعَوَامِلِ. These are types of animals. Okay, like functional animals that you have. So you might have a domesticated animal, you're keeping it for milk. Keeping an animal for milk is clearly a reason for malun nami. It's increasing the productivity of the mal. And likewise, if you're keeping animals for the progeny, okay, so it's obviously increasing the. But what if you got an animal that is there for awamil? Yeah, so awamil is like an animal that works for you. Yeah, jam of amilatun. So you've got an animal a cow that's gonna plow the land. It's gonna pull the big plow machine and it's gonna help you. Or hawamil, jam of hamil, right, which is gonna basically carry stuff for you. So you've got an animal, camels, and you're just gonna use it to carry goods from one place to another. Or alufa, animal that is opposite of saima. Yeah. So alufa means um, it's a fed animal. So you feed it. So there's no sadaqah in these animals. Why is that for? So he says, khilafan li Malik, as opposed to Imam Malik, rahimullah. Lahu, Imam Malik's argument is dhawahir al-nusus. He just says, basically, the Prophet ﷺ, he instructed that zakat should be taken of cows, then you take it of all cows, irrespective of what function that cow plays. And if he said take it of camels, you take it of camels, irrespective of what the duty of the camel is. What's our response? So he's taking the nas, ظاهر nas, yeah, the apparent meaning of the nas. Yeah. لنا قوله عليه السلام ليس في الحوامل. So we've got a text. There's no sadaqah in hawamil, awamil, wala fil baqaratil muthira. Yeah, so muthira is tuthirul ard, just like in the Quran. Yeah, so it plows the land. So in the olden days, instead of tractors, they used to use like strong cows and bull that they used to pull the plowing devices. So he says this is a hadith. Now, is this hadith authentic? If you look in the Hashia, you're going to find that the hadith is problematic. Yeah, there's a whole discussion on this. But what I would say is that read I'la Sunan. Here's the Hashia I'la Sunan, and read Nasbur Raya. Right, Nasbur Raya, very important. If you want to develop your understanding, I would 100%, I would 100% recommend Nasbur Raya and I'la Sunan. These two books definitely, to read them carefully, and even if you have to study them, like if you study a bit of them, I think that would be very good. So you get an idea of how these books are written and designed. It gives you an insight into how Hanafi Dalil works. Nasbur Raya, instead of it being a book for Hanafi Dalil, rather it's like a defense of the Hanafi madhab. Yeah, so just keep that in mind. Okay, so then he says, what's the rational argument? لأن السبب هو المال النامي. What's the reason? What's the sabab for why we have to give zakat? So he goes, because malun nami, you got mal, and that mal is productive, so you should give zakat. Okay. وَدَلِيلُهُ الْإِسَامَةِ. And what's the dalil that, how do we identify a mal is nami? Like if I've got, for example, a mobile phone here, how do I know this mobile phone is nami? Or if I've got a car, if I've got a house, how do I know that? He says, you know that because in animals, it's isama, animals that self-graze. So when they self-graze, they're eating, they're growing, they're getting fatter. I'dad litijara, or they've been kept, reserved for trade. Like you bought them because you want to sell them off. And in this case, these two reasons are the primary reasons for mal nami. They're not found. Like a hawamil, right? Awamil and alufa. These are all animals that don't fulfill this criteria. لِأَنَّ فِي الْعَلُوفَةِ. Because when it comes to the alufa animal, that animal which self-grazes, that's been given food, تَتَرَاكَمَ الْمُؤُونَ. Every day you have to feed. I don't know how many times you have to feed a cow a day, but I'm sure it's going to be at least once or twice. Definitely once. And I don't know how many times you have to feed a camel and how many times you have to feed goats and all that. So if you're going to have to feed them, that means this is burden on the owner. So extra burden on the owner, it means it should relieve the zakat because there's no productivity. Now the amount of money you're putting into the animal, it counters the amount of productivity you're getting out of it. فَيَنْعَدِمُ النَّمَا مَعْنًا. So حقيقة there is nama, because if you're feeding an animal and the animal used to weigh, let's say 100 kilos, and now all of a sudden it's become 200 kilos, there is nama, there's growth. But the amount that you're putting into the animal, is actually countering that. This is why he says, يَنْعَدِمُ النَّمَاءُ مَعْنًا. So from a legal perspective, the animal is not productive. It might be physically productive, but legally it's not productive because your money you're losing out. ثم السائمة هي التي. So now remember I told you this before. What is a self-grazing animal? هي التي تكتفي بالرعي, is the one that suffices with رعي, meaning feeding, في أكثر الحول. Yeah, so as long as more than 6 months the shepherd takes the animals out to the pasture and they eat and then they come back. As long as they're doing this more than 6 months, it falls under the category of self-grazing, and therefore it becomes potential to zakat. حتى لو علفها نصف الحول. So much so that if a person was to feed the animal for half a year or even more than half a year, كانت alufa. It falls under the alufa category. Why is this for? So why do we use 6 months? Why the Hanafis using 6 months? Why don't they use, all of it? Why don't they say it has to eat on its own for the entire year? It's because لأن القليل تابع للأكثر. So they use this qaida or ضابطة in fiqh, or rather qaida, which is the qalil, it actually falls into the kathir. Yeah. So this masla, if you want to read more about this masla comes in the masla of, where a person nakedness and they're praying salat, their body, how much of the body has to become exposed. So Imam Abu Yusuf says half, and Imam Abu Hanif and Muhammad, they have two aqwal, a third or a quarter of the body has to become exposed. So the idea is that when something is like 100%, so if 90% it's eating outside and 10% you're feeding it, that means that 10% is tabi of the 90%. If 80% is eating outside and 20% of the time you're feeding it, that means 20 is less than 80, therefore 20 is subsumed in 80. And likewise 70, 30, 60, 40. But once you get to 50, right, as long as one is 51, the 49 is subsumed in the 51. Does that make sense? So that's how they look at it. It's a very fiqhy concept. It's very sort of like rational, makes sense. Okay, we'll stop there. Okay, so that's basically what I just wanted to mention. There are some texts that I'll just read to you, and if you have any questions, we'll just summarize it and then you can ask those. So Binaya doesn't really have much more than what I've said. Binaya doesn't really mention anything else. There is, for example, like he mentions Abu Yusuf's qawl, where he says that if a person is a zakat giver has to give a binti makhad and he doesn't have a binti makhad, he can give a ibn labun in its place. Now, obviously, how do you get that? How do you work that out? Like, how do you work out that an ibn makhad is equal to ibn labun is equal to a binti makhad? How do you work that out? So he hasn't really elaborated on the reason for why Abu Yusuf says this, even though Imam Malik and Shafi and Ahmed take this call. So that's one thing that you can make a note of. The other thing is okay. I think it was Dur al-Hukam Shurun Bulali in Hashia. This whole like discussion of the musaddiq and musaddaq, this like linguistic, he mentions a little bit about that, so you can look at there about the how this word is pronounced. And also Dur al-Hukam, Bahr al-Ra'iq, they all discuss this issue of the Sahib al-Hidayah, when we said he seems to be the only one that says that the musaddiq, the zakat giver, is the one that has ikhtiyar, not the zakat. The zakat collector has the ikhtiyar, not the zakat giver. Whereas everyone else says, no, this seems to be wrong. So this is Dur al-Hukam, Shurun Bulali says, حاصله اختيار أن الخيار للمالك دون الساعي. Sa'i means zakat collector. That the ikhtiyar should be for the owner of the animal, not the zakat collector. خلافا لما يفيده ظاهر الهداية كما هو نص الأصل. Look at that. He says this is actually found in the text of Imam Muhammad, Nasul Asl. Imam Muhammad seems to be saying this. Maybe that's why Sahib al-Hidayah has taken this view. وَرَدَّهُ فِي النِّهَايَةِ Nihaya, like we read Nihaya, does rad on this. Mi'raj al-Diraya does rad on this. وَقَالَ إِنَّ الْخِيَارِ لِلْمَالِكِ مُطْلَقًا. Okay, so he talks about that. And then if you read in Rad al-Muhtar. Rad al-Muhtar is like a very long discussion. It's worth reading, I would say, definitely. And he talks about this issue of Imam Muhammad, the Asl, quoting this masla, and others like mentioning it. So I'm not going to go through everything that he says. But yeah, you can read over there. But the main thing that you should take away from this lesson is the concept of how the Hanafis rationalize the idea of giving a substitute. Yeah, substitute being given. Okay, if you've got any questions, put in the comments. Let's just summarize what we did today. So we said that when it comes to zakat collector, the musaddiq, then he can actually take either higher tier or the lower tier. If he takes the higher tier, then this is going to resemble like a type of trade, right? Where on two sides, he's taking the higher tier, he's given back the excess. So it seems as though there's a two-way exchange. And if it takes the lower tier, then he has to take the lower tier with money on top. And then we talked about the idea of are we allowed to give qima instead of giving the exact item that's been mentioned in the text. So we said this is allowed in zakat, kafarat, sadaqat al-fitr, ushr, and another 5 things it's allowed in. And Shafis compare it to dahaya and say you can't give in qurbani and hadaya, so why should you be allowed to give it here? And we say the asal illa over here, or the asal sort of like rationale behind this, is that we're meant to help the poor, and we're helping the sequence of events that's getting the rizq to the poor people. So that is whether it's in the form of an animal or the value of the animal, like jizya. And as for why we're not allowed to do it in dahaya is because the objective there is to slaughter the animal, the letting of the blood. And then we talked about what about animals which are there for purely for awamil purposes and they're not alufas. And we said the reason is because the nama might be there haqiqatan, but ma'nan there's no nama because the amount you're putting into the animal is countering how much you're getting out of it. Khalas. Alright guys, Jazakallah khair. Thank you very much, and inshallah I'll see you guys next week. Assalamu alaikum.